The drive down from the mountains felt like a warning, 30 miles of gray fog pressing against the windshield. I walked into my home expecting silence, but found the soft glow of the living room lamps instead. Then came the laughter, delicate and unfamiliar. I stepped through the doorway and saw Evan sliding a gold bracelet onto her wrist. He froze instantly, looking exactly like a man caught holding a grenade. And I knew my quiet life was over. My name is Lauren Whitford. To most people at Northbridge Analytics, I am simply a function of my job title, financial manager. I am 34 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life being the reliable one. I am the steady hand. I am the invisible woman who ensures the columns balance and the red ink never bleeds over into the black. People rely on me because I am predictable, grounded, and unshakable. But stability is a fragile thing, often just a thin veneer painted over a rotting foundation, and it only takes one loose stone to bring the whole house down. I was supposed to be 3 hours away, up in the mountains at the Aspen Lodge for another 2 days. The annual company retreat was in full swing, a weekend of forced socialization and team-building exercises that involved falling backward into the arms of people you barely trusted with a spreadsheet, let alone your physical safety. But around noon, a cold, metallic knot had tightened in the pit of my stomach. It was not nausea. It was an instinct, primal and screaming, telling me that I was in the wrong place. I tried to ignore it, blaming the altitude, but the feeling of dread grew until it felt like static buzzing against my skin. I told my boss I had a migraine and left before lunch. The drive back to Silver Hollow was a blur of winding roads and gray asphalt. I drove with the radio off, letting the silence of the car amplify my unease. The Colorado sky was a bruised purple and slate gray, hanging low over the pines like a damp wool blanket. It was the kind of afternoon that felt like a held breath, waiting for thunder that might never come. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sun was already surrendering to the gloom. My house usually felt like a sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the financial world could not touch me. But as I killed the engine, the silence of the neighborhood felt heavy, almost oppressive. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The hallway was warm, too warm, and the air smelled faintly of something sweet, like vanilla and musk, a scent that did not belong to me. I dropped my keys into the bowl, the metal clinking loudly in the quiet. But no one called out. That was when I saw the light spilling from the living room. It was not the bright overhead light we usually used in the evenings. It was the amber glow of the corner floor lamp, the one we kept dimmed for movie nights or quiet conversations. Then came the sound. A laugh. It was low, throaty, and distinctly feminine. It was not a laugh I knew. I moved toward the archway, my boots sinking into the carpet, making me a ghost in my own home. I stopped at the threshold, my hand gripping the doorframe. There they were. My husband, Evan Whitford, was standing by the fireplace. He was leaning down, his broad shoulders obscuring the woman seated on the edge of the sofa. He was holding her left hand with a tenderness that made my breath hitch in my throat. I watched his fingers deftly manipulating the clasp of a delicate gold bracelet around her wrist. It was an intimate gesture, something far more personal than a hug or a kiss. It was an act of ownership. Evan. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, brittle and sharp like cracking ice. The effect was immediate. Evan stiffened. He did not turn around slowly. He jerked upright, dropping the woman's hand as if it had suddenly caught fire. When he finally looked at me, his face was a map of panic. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open, the classic, unmistakable expression of a man caught in the act. The woman on the couch scrambled to stand up. It was Sylvia Grant. I recognized her immediately. She was the new marketing associate at Evan's firm, a woman of maybe 25 with bright eyes that were currently darting around the room looking for an exit. She tugged her sleeve down, trying to cover the gold glinting on her wrist, but the movement was clumsy and far too late. I stood rooted to the hardwood floor, my suitcase handle digging into my palm. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing, before Evan shattered it. "Lauren, you were back early. I was just helping Sylvia with a clasp that was broken. She stopped by for the files." The words tumbled out of him in a chaotic rush, tripping over each other. He was speaking too fast, filling the air with noise to drown out what we all knew was the truth. But I was not listening to his words. I was looking at his hands, which were shaking, and at Sylvia, who could not even meet my eyes. I walked past them and into the kitchen, my movements stiff and mechanical. I needed to put a physical wall between myself and the living room, or I was going to scream. My hands gripped the cool granite of the countertop, my knuckles turning white. Inside my chest, my heart was hammering against my ribs with such violence that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a rhythmic thumping that drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. Evan followed me instantly. I could hear his footsteps, heavy and frantic, trailing mine. "Lauren, wait, you are taking this the wrong way," he said, his voice pitching up at the end. He leaned against the island, trying to look casual but failing miserably. "Sylvia just stopped by to go over the quarterly projections. The deadline is Monday, and we are behind. It was strictly work." I did not turn around. I stared at the stainless steel sink. "Work," I repeated flatly. "Do you usually fix the jewelry of your colleagues during work meetings?" "Evan." The clasp was stuck, he insisted, waving a hand in the air. She was complaining about it hurting her wrist. I was just being polite. Behind him, I heard the front door open and close. Sylvia had not even said goodbye. She had fled the scene like a thief, her face flushed a deep crimson, her eyes fixed on the floor as she scurried past the kitchen archway. But even with her gone, her presence lingered. The air in the living room, and now drifting into the kitchen, was thick with that scent vanilla and heavy musk. It was a perfume I would never wear, cloying and desperate. I turned around slowly. Evan was watching the hallway where she had disappeared, a look of naked relief washing over his face. "She has been texting you late at night for 3 weeks, I said, the memory surfacing with sudden clarity. "You told me it was an urgent project. You said the team was in crisis mode." "It is," Evan argued, though he flinched. "Marketing is a nightmare right now." My eyes drifted to the counter where Sylvia had left a half-empty glass of water. I walked over to it. It was a crystal tumbler, one from our wedding set. I picked it up, feeling the cold condensation against my fingertips. There, on the rim, was a perfect crimson crescent. It was a dark, bold shade of red lipstick, stamped onto the glass like a territorial mark. It looked like a confession that did not need words. And then the realization hit me, cold and sharp. The bracelet. 2 weeks ago, I had seen a charge on our joint credit card for $1,200 at a local jeweler. When I asked Evan about it, he had smiled that charming, boyish smile and told me it was a birthday gift for his mother. He said he wanted to get her something special this year. I had felt a warmth in my chest then, thinking about what a thoughtful son he was. But the gold chain I just saw on Sylvia's wrist, the delicate filigree pattern was identical to the one I had seen on the jeweler's website when I checked the transaction. He did not buy it for his mother. He bought it for her. Using our money. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Suddenly, the last few months began to rearrange themselves in my mind. The pieces of the puzzle, which had seemed so scattered and irrelevant, snapped together to form a grotesque picture. The cash withdrawals I had dismissed as incidental expenses. The nights he came home past 9 o'clock, smelling of mints and exhaustion. The time at the retreat when a colleague joked that Evan looked too happy whenever Sylvia was in the room. I had laughed it off then. I was not laughing now. I looked at Evan. He was leaning against the counter, watching me closely, trying to gauge how much damage control he needed to do. He looked so normal, So handsome in his button-down shirt, but he felt like a stranger. I was trembling, not from shock anymore, but from a creeping, icy fear. If he could lie so easily about the bracelet, about the texts, about her being here in our home, what else was he lying about? Evan took his phone out of his pocket and set it on the island, perhaps trying to show he had nothing to hide, or maybe just out of habit. He reached out to touch my arm. "Honey, please, you are tired from the drive. Let me make you a drink." As his hand moved toward me, the screen of his phone lit up. It was face up on the marble. I looked down. A text message notification hovered on the lock screen. "Sylvia, I'm home. Are you okay?" I stared at the words. The intimacy of it, the immediate check-in, the shared secret tore through whatever denial I had left. Evan followed my gaze. He saw the message. He froze, his hand hovering in midair, caught once again. This time, there was no explanation that could save him. I didn't throw the phone at him. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. Instead, a cold, hard numbness settled over me, turning my skin into armor. I looked at Evan, who was still staring at the screen like it was a bomb, and I simply turned around. "I am going to take a shower," I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. "We will talk in the morning." I left him standing in the kitchen, paralyzed by his own sloppiness. But I didn't go to the shower. I went straight to the guest bedroom, locked the door, and opened my laptop. The wife in me was dying, but the financial manager was wide awake. At Northbridge Analytics, my job was to find discrepancies, to trace lines of revenue until they made sense. I treated my marriage like an audit. I logged into our joint bank accounts. At first glance, everything looked normal. The mortgage was paid, the utilities cleared. But I dug deeper, downloading the raw transaction data for the last 6 months. I sorted by recipient. There it was, a recurring payment to something called Portwell Consulting. It started small, $200 here, $300 there, but the frequency had ramped up in the last month. I opened a new tab and searched for the business registry. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Portwell Consulting was an LLC formed 6 months ago, the registered agent Sylvia Grant. My stomach twisted. He wasn't just buying her jewelry, he was funneling our money directly into her pocket under the guise of consulting fees. But why I needed more? I logged into the credit monitoring service I hadn't checked in a year. The report loaded, and the blood drained from my face. There was a new line of credit opened 4 months ago. A personal loan for $50,000. The primary borrower was listed as Lauren Whitford. I clicked on the digital copy of the promissory note. At the bottom of the page, scrawled in black ink, was my signature. Except I had never signed it. The loop on the letter L was too wide. The letter T crossed too high. It was a forgery. Evan had stolen my identity to borrow $50,000, and he had handed the cash, or at least a large chunk of it, to his mistress. I felt a scream building in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Panic was useless. Evidence was everything. I pulled an external hard drive from my bag and began copying files. Bank statements, the credit report, the business registry for Portwell. I emailed copies to a private address I had created years ago and never used. Once the financial trail was secured, I turned to the personal one. I created a throwaway Instagram account with a fake name and no profile picture. Sylvia's profile was public, of course it was. She was the kind of girl who needed an audience. I scrolled back through her timeline. It was a shrine to her vanity, but the captions told a hidden story. 5 weeks ago, she posted a picture of a latte art heart with the caption "New Beginnings with someone special." 3 weeks ago, a photo of her legs resting on the dashboard of a luxury car, Evan's car. Then, I found the smoking gun, a post from 2 months ago. It was a picture of 2 distinct cocktails sitting on a rustic wooden table, backlit by a sunset I recognized. The location tag said, Aspen. The date matched perfectly with the weekend Evan told me he was at a mandatory compliance seminar in Denver. Late nights working hard, The caption read, followed by a winking emoji. I sat back in the chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. This wasn't just an affair. An affair was a betrayal of the heart. This was a systematic dismantling of my life. Evan wasn't just sleeping with her. He was funding a new life with her using my credit score and my savings. He was building a parachute for himself and stitching it together with my money. I closed the laptop as heavy footsteps approached the door. The handle jiggled. Lauren. Evan's voice was muffled through the wood. Open the door. You are being unreasonable. I didn't answer. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, fully dressed. The air in the house had shifted. It was no longer a home. It was a cage, and I was in it with a predator who didn't realize I had just sharpened my claws. When I walked out the next morning, the silence between us was thick and suffocating. Evan watched me over his coffee cup, his eyes narrow and calculating. He knew I had seen the text. He suspected I knew more, but he had no idea that I wasn't just hurt. I was counting the cost, and I was going to make sure he paid every single cent. The next morning, I called in sick to Northbridge for the first time in 6 years. Instead of driving to the office, I drove 40 minutes into the city to see Maggie Turner. Maggie had been my best friend since college, a sharp-tongued corporate lawyer who treated the law like a contact sport. I sat in her glass-walled office, twisting my wedding ring, and laid everything out. The forged loan, the shell company, the affair. I expected her to be angry. I did not expect her to look terrified. Maggie did not offer me tissues. She offered me a file. She had run a background check on Portwell Consulting the moment I texted her the name. Lauren, you need to leave him, Maggie said, her voice dropping to a whisper even though the door was shut. Tonight. Pack a bag and get out. I shook my head. I can't just leave. He stole $50,000 from me. If I run now, he disappears with my money and my identity. I need to know what he is doing. Maggie slid a piece of paper across the mahogany desk. It was a printout from a federal database. Portwell Consulting isn't just a place to hide mistress money. It is flagged on an IRS watch list for money laundering. And it gets worse. I pulled Evan's old employment records, the ones from before you met. I looked at the documents. There was a redacted incident report from a brokerage firm in Chicago. He was investigated for embezzlement 7 years ago, Maggie explained, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. It was settled internally, which means they fired him and swept it under the rug to avoid a scandal. But here is the kicker. His name wasn't Evan Whitford then. The room seemed to tilt. What? He changed his name legally 6 years ago, she said. He erased his past. Lauren, you didn't marry a man. You married a ghost. He is dangerous. I left Maggie's office with a buzzing in my ears that had nothing to do with the city traffic. I needed to see the people who created him. I drove straight to Evan's parents' house in the suburbs. They had always been distant in-laws, polite but cold, people who preferred surface-level conversations about the weather. When I knocked on their door at 2 in the afternoon, his mother, Barbara, looked like she had seen an apparition. They let me in, but they didn't offer me tea. We sat in their stiff, dust-free living room. I didn't dance around the subject. I told them Evan was in trouble, that there were financial irregularities. I watched their faces closely. I expected shock. Instead, I saw resignation. He is a good boy, his mother said, her hands wringing a lace handkerchief. He just gets confused. Confused? I asked, my voice rising. He forged my signature on a $50,000 loan. That was when his father, a man who usually let his wife do the talking, looked up from the floor. His eyes were watery and tired. Is he mixed up in that business again? The air left the room again. What business? I demanded. His mother shot his father a silencing look, sharp as a knife. Nothing, she snapped. Just old misunderstandings. You should go home to your husband, Lauren. Work it out. I walked out of their house. but the truth was already settling in my gut like lead. They knew. They knew exactly what he was, and they had let me marry him anyway. I wasn't just a wife to Evan. I was a cover. I was the respectable woman with the perfect credit score and the high-ranking job at a financial firm who made him look legitimate. I was his shield against the world. When I returned home that evening, the house felt different. It felt like a stage set where a tragedy was about to be performed. Evan was already there. He was pacing the living room, his movements jerky and agitated. He asked where I had been. I told him I went for a long drive to clear my head. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push it. He was too distracted. That night, neither of us slept. I lay on my side of the bed, feigning sleep, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. It was fast, shallow. Around 3 a.m, he slipped out of bed. I waited 10 seconds, then crept to the bedroom door. I could hear him downstairs in the kitchen, his voice a low, frantic hiss. "She is asking questions," Evan whispered into the phone. "No, not yet. I need more time. The transfer isn't complete." I stood in the dark at the top of the stairs, shivering in my nightgown. Maggie was right. He was dangerous, but she was wrong about one thing. I couldn't leave. Not yet. If I left, I was a victim. If I stayed, I could be the one who finally buried his secrets. 20 minutes after the phone call ended, the garage door rumbled open. I was already waiting in my car parked 2 blocks down the street, the engine off and the lights killed. When Evan's silver sedan slid out of the driveway and turned left, I gave him a 10-second head start before I turned the ignition key. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached, but my mind was razor sharp. The fear I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by the adrenaline of the hunt. I followed him through the sleeping streets of Silver Hollow. He drove toward the industrial district on the edge of town, a place of corrugated metal warehouses and flickering street lamps. He pulled into the back lot of a closed 24-hour diner that had gone bust last year. I cut my lights and coasted into the shadow of a dumpster about 50 yards away. Another car was already there, a red convertible. Sylvia. I took out my phone and hit record. The camera lens zoomed in, cutting through the grain of the darkness. Evan stepped out of his car. He looked agitated, constantly checking his surroundings, but he never looked toward the dumpsters. Sylvia got out to meet him. She was not wearing her office attire. She was in a hoodie and jeans, looking small and nervous. "Here," Evan said, his voice carrying in the stillness of the night. "This is the last batch, encrypted, just like they asked." He pressed a small silver USB drive into her palm. Sylvia closed her fingers around the drive, but she did not get back in her car. She grabbed Evan's arm. "Are you sure she does not know she was acting strange yesterday? Evan, if she finds out—" "Stop it!" Evan snapped, pulling his arm away. "Lauren is consistent. She is boring. She is not smart enough to suspect anything beyond what is right in front of her nose. I told her it was just a rough patch at work, and she believed me because she wants to believe me." I watched the screen of my phone, listening to my husband call me stupid. The last remnant of love I held for him evaporated in that second. It was replaced by a cold, calculating rage that felt like ice water in my veins. Evan leaned in closer to her. "We are almost there. Just a few more weeks. Once the audit clears, her personal accounts will be drained, and Portwell Consulting will replace Northbridge as the primary vendor for the city contract. We will have the payout, and we will be gone before she even realizes she is bankrupt." My breath caught in my throat. This was not just about stealing $50,000 from me. He was targeting Northbridge Analytics. He was using my credentials, my access, to facilitate a massive vendor fraud scheme that would destroy my company and leave me holding the bag for millions. He was not just breaking my heart. He was framing me for a federal crime. They kissed quick and desperate and then parted ways. I waited until both their taillights had faded into the distance before I lowered the phone. I saved the video to the cloud immediately. I had the confession. Now I needed to know exactly what was on that drive. I drove home, taking a different route, my mind racing through forensic accounting strategies. When I pulled up to our house, the lights were exactly as I had left them, but as I walked up the porch steps, I stopped. The front door was unlatched. A sliver of darkness gaped between the frame and the wood. I pushed the door open with my fingertips. The house was silent. "Evan," I called out, testing the air. No answer. I walked through the hallway. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. The TV was off. The pillows were on the couch. But then I noticed the details. The drawer of the console table was slightly askew. The stack of mail on the counter had been shuffled. The bills were no longer in chronological order. I went upstairs to my home office. My laptop was where I left it, but the position was wrong. I always aligned it parallel to the edge of the desk. Now, it was tilted at a slight angle. Someone had been here while I was out following Evan. They had not taken anything, which meant this was not a burglary. They were looking for something specific. Or perhaps they just wanted me to know that my sanctuary had been breached. It was a warning. I stood in the center of the room, feeling the walls close in. They thought they were hunting a helpless victim, but they had just shown me their hand. I locked the door, sat down at my desk, and began to work. If they wanted a war, the financial manager was about to give them one. I sat in the sterile silence of Maggie's office, the hum of the hard drive the only sound in the room. I had managed to mirror the data from Evan's laptop while he slept the same files he had transferred to that USB drive for Sylvia. Now, the code was unraveling across Maggie's 3 monitors in terrifying detail. "This is not just embezzlement, Lauren," Maggie said, her voice devoid of its usual legal bravado. She pointed to a column of figures highlighted in red. "This is a systemic liquidation. He is not skimming off the top. He is gutting the Northbridge operational accounts. We are talking about nearly $4 million set to move in a single transaction." I leaned in, my eyes scanning the ledger. The destination was Portwell Consulting, but it was the authorization column that made my blood run cold. Every single transfer, every fraudulent invoice, and every approval stamp bore one name, Lauren Whitford. "He set me up," I whispered, the realization settling over me like a heavy shroud. "He did not just want to steal the money. He wanted to leave me behind to go to prison for it." Maggie clicked open a subfolder. It contained digital copies of my passport, my social security card, and a resignation letter drafted in my name, dated for 2 days from now. "He has built a perfect narrative. The stress of the job, the financial desperation. He has created a motive for you. When he and Sylvia disappear with the money, the FBI will walk into your office, find these logs, and you will be the only person they look at." I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced it down. I was done being the victim. I needed to see how he did it. I pulled up the application on my phone that controlled our home security system. I scrolled back through the footage from last week, specifically the hours when I was at the gym. There it was, on the screen. Evan walked into my home office. He looked over his shoulder, checking the hallway, then opened my desk drawer. He took out my physical RSA security token, the one device that generates the changing codes needed to authorize high-level transfers. He logged into my terminal, typed for 10 minutes, and then placed the token back exactly where it belonged. "He is meticulous," Maggie noted, watching the footage over my shoulder. "We have enough to go to the police right now. We call your CEO, we call the FBI, and we stop this." "No," I said, my voice sharp. "If we go to the police now, he claims I gave him access. He claims I was the mastermind and he was just following his wife's instructions. He has had months to plant evidence. I need more than a defense. I need a confession, and I need it to be public." "What are you thinking?" Maggie asked, looking at me with concern. "The shareholder meeting is in 48 hours, I said. "All the board members will be there, the investors, the press. Evan is scheduled to present the quarterly growth strategy." "Lauren," That is dangerous, Maggie warned. If you corner a rat, it bites. He thinks I am the rat, I replied, closing the laptop. He is about to find out I am the trap. I spent the rest of the afternoon building my case. I did not just compile evidence. I constructed a forensic timeline that mirrored his own. I traced the IP addresses of the transfers, matching them to his phone's location data. I cross-referenced the dates of the consulting fees with his trips to see Sylvia. I prepared a presentation of my own, one that would overlay perfectly with his. When I returned home that evening, the air was thick with tension. Evan was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a little too much force. He stopped when I walked in, his eyes scanning my face, looking for any crack in my demeanor. "You are late," he said, his voice casual but his posture rigid. "Where were you?" "Just clearing up some loose ends for the shareholder meeting." I lied, keeping my tone breezy. "I want to make sure the financial reports are perfect for your presentation." Evan's hand tightened on the knife handle. "You do not need to worry about that. I have handled the reports." "I know," I said, walking past him to the refrigerator. I could feel his eyes on my back, cold and calculating. He suspected something. He was watching my every move, waiting for me to slip up. But he did not know that I was not just fixing a bracelet anymore. I was preparing to tighten a noose. The morning began with a calculated performance. Evan stood by the bed, buttoning his cuffs with slow, deliberate movements, blocking the sunlight from the window. He looked down at me with a concern that would have fooled anyone else. His brow furrowed just enough to suggest worry. "You look exhausted, Lauren," he said, his voice smooth. "You were tossing and turning all night. I think you should call in sick today. The shareholder meeting is just a formality. You need rest." It was not a suggestion. It was an order wrapped in velvet. He needed me out of the building. He needed the financial manager absent so he could push through the final authorization without a single objection. I pulled the duvet up to my chin, feigning a weakness I no longer felt. "Maybe you are right," I whispered. "I feel terrible." He smiled, satisfied that his compliant wife was obeying the script. "I will tell them you are down with a migraine. Stay in bed." I waited exactly 3 minutes after his car left the driveway before I threw off the covers. I did not dress in my usual gray suit. I chose a sharp black blazer and heels that clicked against the floor like a weapon being loaded. I was out of the house by 8 o'clock, but as soon as I merged onto the main highway leading to the city, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. A black sedan was 2 car lengths behind me. At first, I thought it was just traffic. But when I changed lanes, it mirrored me. When I took the exit ramp toward the business district early, the sedan swerved across 2 lanes of traffic to follow. It was not Evan. He was already at the office. This was someone else, someone hired to make sure I stayed home, or worse, to make sure I never arrived. My hands slicked against the steering wheel. I could not lead them to the office. I had to lose them first. I took a sharp right toward the shopping district, forcing the engine to roar as I accelerated. I pulled into the multi-level parking structure of the chaotic downtown mall, spiraling up to the 3rd floor, then cutting hard around a corner and slotting my car between 2 massive delivery trucks. I ducked down in the seat, holding my breath. Through the gap in the trucks, I watched the black sedan scream past, tires screeching as it continued up to the 4th level, searching for me. I did not wait. I reversed out and took the service exit on the south side. By the time I reached Northbridge Analytics, my heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was ice cold. I met Maggie in the lobby. She looked at me, noting the tension in my jaw, and simply nodded. "The external audit team is already in the server room," she said quietly. "We have secured the logs. Are you ready?" "Let's do this," I said. We took the elevator to the top floor. The hallway leading to the main boardroom was lined with glass, and I could see the silhouettes of the board members inside. The meeting had already started. I could hear Evan's voice booming through the heavy oak doors, confident and charismatic. I pushed the doors open with both hands. The heavy thud of the doors hitting the stops echoed through the room. Every head turned. At the head of the long mahogany table, Evan stood in front of a projection screen displaying a graph titled Strategic Expansion and Vendor Consolidation. He was mid-sentence, his hand raised in a gesture of triumph, but as his eyes landed on me, the color drained from his face instantly. He looked like a man who was seeing a corpse walk into his wedding. "Lauren," he stammered, his charm fracturing. "I thought you were sick." "I made a miraculous recovery," I said, my voice steady, carrying to every corner of the silent room. I walked toward the head of the table. The board members looked between us, sensing the sudden, sharp drop in atmospheric pressure. Evan tried to step in front of me, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting his hired muscle to drag me away. But it was too late. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver USB drive, the one I had filmed him handing to Sylvia. I placed it on the table. The metallic click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You are discussing the expansion plan," I said, locking eyes with him. "Perfect. I have some supplementary data regarding the Portwell Consulting acquisition that I think the board needs to see immediately." Evan froze. He knew exactly what was on that drive. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the static of an approaching storm. He looked at the USB, then at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He realized the game had changed. The victim had not just walked into the trap. She had brought the guillotine with her. Evan tried to recover the moment with the desperation of a drowning man grasping at driftwood. He turned his back to me, facing the confused board members, and raised his voice to project authority. He launched into his rehearsed speech about the future of Northbridge, using buzzwords like synergy and unparalleled growth to paint a picture of a company on the verge of a golden era. He spoke of a new strategic direction that would increase revenue by 40% within the next 2 quarters, his hands gesturing wildly at the charts behind him. I let him speak for exactly 10 seconds. I wanted him to climb as high as possible so the fall would be fatal. "Whose future?" I asked, my voice cutting through his monologue like a razor blade. I stepped closer to the podium, ignoring the heavy silence that had descended on the room. "Yours or Northbridge's?" Evan turned to me, a tight, artificial smile plastered on his face, but his eyes were darting around the room in panic. "Lauren, honey," he said, his tone condescendingly sweet. "We can discuss your concerns at home. You are clearly not feeling well." I didn't answer him. I didn't even look at him. I walked past him to the control console on the side of the conference table. I plugged the USB drive into the main terminal. The screen behind Evan flickered, wiping away his colorful charts of projected growth. In their place, a grainy, black and white video feed appeared. It was the footage from the parking lot. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the boardroom's surround sound system. Evan's voice filled the room, arrogant and dismissive. "Lauren is not smart enough to suspect anything beyond what is right in front of her nose." A collective gasp went through the room. I saw the CEO, Marcus Thorne, lean forward, his eyes narrowing. The video continued. "We are almost there. Just a few more weeks. Once the audit clears, her personal accounts will be drained, and Portwell will replace Northbridge in the contract. We will have the payout, and we will be gone before she even realizes she is bankrupt." Evan stood frozen at the front of the room. The color had drained from his face entirely, leaving him looking gray and sickly. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to claim it was a deep fake or a manipulation, but no sound came out. "Lock the doors," Marcus Thorne said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute command. "Security, seal this room now." I typed a command into the console, bringing up the second file. This was the spreadsheet Maggie and I had compiled. It showed the flow of money, nearly $4 million siphoned from the operational budget into the shell accounts of Portwell Consulting. "This is not just a plan," I told the board, pointing at the screen. This is an active embezzlement scheme. The authorization codes used for these transfers were stolen from my physical token, which Evan accessed while I was at the gym. He intended to frame me for the theft and flee the country. The realization hit Evan that his life was over. The facade of the polished executive shattered. He let out a guttural sound, something between a growl and a sob, and lunged toward the console. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his face twisted in ugly rage. "It is a lie! She is lying!" He tried to grab the laptop, but he never reached me. 2 security guards who had been stationed at the door intercepted him. They slammed him against the wall, pinning his arms behind his back. The violence of it was shocking in the sterile environment of the boardroom, but I watched it without flinching. "Get Sylvia Grant on the line!" Marcus barked at his assistant. Now, the assistant, pale and shaking, dialed the number on speaker. It rang once, twice. Then a generic operator message played. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She is gone." "Evan," I said, looking at my husband as he struggled against the guards. "She cleared out her desk an hour ago. She knew I was coming. You were the only one stupid enough to stay." The double doors at the back of the room swung open again. Maggie walked in, flanking 2 agents in windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow on the back. "Evan Whitford," one of the agents said, stepping forward with handcuffs ready. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft." As they dragged him out, Evan looked back at me. There was no love left in his eyes, only a terrified realization that he had underestimated the one person he thought he owned. I stood at the head of the table, alone but unbroken, watching the man who tried to destroy me being led away in chains. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the boardroom confrontation evaporated the moment the heavy doors closed behind the FBI agents. In its place, a cold, hollow silence settled over my life. I expected satisfaction. I expected to feel the triumph of the victor. Instead, as I sat behind the one-way glass of the interrogation room 2 days later, watching my husband weep into his hands, I felt nothing but a terrifying clarity. Evan crumbled under pressure faster than wet cardboard. He did not just confess, he spilled everything in a desperate bid for a plea deal. The story he told the agents was not a simple tale of greed and lust. It was something far darker. Sylvia Grant was not just a mistress. She was a corporate operative, a fixer hired by a shadow financial conglomerate looking to acquire Northbridge Analytics. Their plan was not just to steal money. It was to use the embezzlement scandal pinned entirely on me to crash the company's stock price so they could buy the controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. "It wasn't my idea," Evan pleaded, his voice cracking through the speaker system. "She approached me. She said they had leverage. She said if I didn't help them open the back door to the servers, they would ruin me. I was trapped." I watched him, his face splotchy and tear-stained, and felt a wave of nausea. He was trying to paint himself as a victim, claiming he had been seduced and blackmailed. But I knew the truth. He might have been a pawn, but he had been a willing one. He had chosen to sleep with her. He had chosen to forge my signature. He had chosen to throw his wife to the wolves to save his own skin. The scope of the operation was staggering. The agents told me this group was linked to money laundering operations across 3 different states. I sat there, shivering in my cardigan, realizing that I had almost been the fall guy for a federal crime syndicate. My quiet life in the suburbs, my boring job, my stable marriage, it had all been targeted, dissected, and weaponized. The reality of the danger hit home when the police raided Sylvia's rental property. She was long gone, having vanished the moment Evan was arrested, but she left her workspace behind. In a locked basement room, investigators found a wall covered in photographs. There were pictures of me walking to my car, pictures of me at the grocery store, blueprints of our house. It was not a love nest. It was a war room. She had studied me like a lab rat for months before she ever made contact with Evan. Because the threat was still active and Sylvia was in the wind, the FBI placed me under protective monitoring. Northbridge was in chaos. The board suspended 3 major international projects while the forensic accountants tore through the servers. In a twist of irony, the board didn't fire me. Instead, Marcus Thorne promoted me to emergency financial supervisor. I was the only one who knew the system well enough to find the rot, so now it was my job to clean up the mess my husband had made. "You need to look at this differently," Maggie told me a week later as we sat in her car outside my house. "You didn't just survive a bad divorce. Lauren, you escaped a shark tank. Most people would be in prison right now." I looked up at the house. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial that I had once loved, but now it looked like a mausoleum. I couldn't sleep there anymore. Every shadow looked like Sylvia. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like Evan. I decided to leave Silver Hollow. I packed only the essentials clothes, my laptop, and the few personal items that Evan hadn't tainted. I left the furniture. I left the wedding photos. I left the life I had built for 10 years because it was built on a foundation of sand. As I threw the last box into the trunk of my rental car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a call from the FBI agent assigned to my case. It was a text message from a blocked number. I stared at the screen, the gray sky reflecting on the glass. The message was short, just 5 words that made the blood freeze in my veins. "Don't think this is over." I looked around the empty street, my heart hammering against my ribs. The wind rustled the dead leaves in the driveway, sounding like footsteps. I realized then that while Evan was behind bars, the people who pulled his strings were still out there, and they were not happy that I had cut them. I got into the car, locked the doors, and drove away from Silver Hollow without looking back, knowing that the real hunt had just begun. I did not delete the text message. Instead, I handed it to the special agent in charge of my case. That single moment of arrogance from the shadows became their undoing. We traced the digital footprint of that message not to a burner phone, but to a routed server in the Cayman Islands linked to a holding company called Obsidian Ventures. It was a massive financial predator, a firm that specialized in hostile takeovers of mid-sized tech companies. The picture finally came into sharp focus. Sylvia Grant had not been running away. She was merely reporting back to headquarters. The revelation was a punch to the gut. Obsidian Ventures had been short-selling Northbridge stock for months. They needed a scandal, a massive internal embezzlement case involving a senior financial manager to tank the stock price so they could buy the company for scraps. I was never just the wife in the way of an affair. I was the target. They needed me to take the fall to devalue the entire corporation. I spent the next 2 weeks working in a windowless room with the FBI, analyzing transaction patterns that linked Obsidian to Sylvia. We built a net so tight that not even air could slip through. When the news broke, it was not the scandal they wanted. It was the raid they never saw coming. Federal agents intercepted Sylvia at a border crossing near Niagara Falls, just as she was trying to slip into Canada with a dyed blonde bob and a passport under the name of a dead woman. I decided to attend the preliminary hearing. Maggie told me I did not have to go, that I could stay safe in the witness room, but I refused. I needed to look them in the eye. When the bailiffs led Sylvia into the courtroom, she looked smaller than I remembered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the jagged exhaustion of a cornered animal. When she saw me sitting in the front row, she stopped. "He was easy," she said, her voice rough as she nodded toward the holding cell where Evan was waiting. Evan was a weak, greedy little man. He was the easy mark. But you were the problem. You were too quiet. "We thought you were weak, but you were just waiting." She was right. My silence had been my vulnerability, but it had also been my camouflage. For years, I had let myself fade into the background, believing that stability meant invisibility. I had let Evan shine while I did the work. I had let the world overlook me. But as I stood there in that courtroom, watching the judge deny bail for both of them, I realized that the invisible woman was dead. I had buried her in the ashes of my marriage. The sentencing 3 months later was the final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Evan received 12 years for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Sylvia, with her priors and her role in the larger racketeering scheme, got 20. I watched Evan being led away in his orange jumpsuit. He looked back once, searching for pity in my eyes, but the well was dry. I did not hate him anymore. I did not love him. I felt nothing but a profound sense of lightness, as if I had been carrying a stone on my back for a decade and finally set it down. I left Silver Hollow the next day. I did not just move houses, I moved lives. I relocated to Chicago, a city of steel and wind where no one knew my name. I used the settlement money from the lawsuit against Obsidian Ventures to start my own boutique forensic accounting firm. I named it Phoenix Financial, a cliché perhaps, but accurate. My job now is to protect women and small business owners from the kind of financial abuse I endured. I spend my days hunting down hidden assets and exposing the lies that people tell with numbers. I am 35 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am not defined by who I married or who I work for. I drive home to an apartment that I bought with my own money. The air smells like fresh rain and independence. I walk in, turn on the lights, and listen to the beautiful silence, not the silence of secrets, but the silence of peace. I was a victim, then a survivor, but now I am simply the author of my own story, and I finally like the way it reads. Thank you so much for listening to my story and walking this difficult path with me. I would love to hear from you, so please comment down below and tell me where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach and empower even more people.